All right, so let's get going on this class on Chapter 10, Choice, Matching, and Self-Control. So we're going to specifically concentrate on self-control, a very interesting psychological phenomenon in the sense that oftentimes we can exert self-control, we can choose one thing that we know is better for us over another thing, but oftentimes we fail in our self-control. So psychologists have often researched what it is about self-control that allows us to make the correct choices versus the incorrect choices, and why oftentimes we have failures of self-control. And today we'll see a model of self-control that begins to try to understand that phenomenon. But before we get to that, just a reminder, Exam 3 is coming up next class. So this got pushed back because of the medical leave. So it's going to be happening next class. Hopefully everybody's had a chance to watch the special online class. It was actually shorter than I had anticipated because I did originally schedule in a sort of bumper class just in case we didn't get to cover some of the material, so it wasn't as extensive as I thought it might be. However, make sure that you do check it out because that will be on the exam. And the exam is going to cover basically the 4 chapters we've covered since exam number 2, so chapter 7, 8, 9, and 10. And it'll also cover those lectures, including today's lecture, which will be our look at chapter 10. In terms of the format, nothing is changing. So the format that we've seen so far, 2 sections, multiple choice questions. Section number 1 is material from the readings that are not covered in class, so things that we just do not have the time in a single semester to go over, but you still should be aware of it. Those will be tested with recognition type questions only. However, section 2 will cover material from the readings that are covered in class and other topics that we have taken time to cover in class. So for example, today's Ainsley and Raylan model of self-control will be in section 2. And that is more heavily weighted. That is worth 2/3 of your score. All right, so that is upcoming Thursday, November 15th. So next class, we'll be having our exam number 3. Any questions on that? All right, let's start with choice, matching, and self-control. So we're going to take a basic look at self-control, beginning with a definition of what is self-control. So we use the term often, but it has a very specific psychological definition that kind of really allowed researchers to hone in on a particular phenomenon that we label as self-control. And then we'll take a look at a very influential model of self-control to try to understand what is going on in our minds when we exercise or fail to exercise self-control, and is the Ainsley-Raylan model of self-control. All right, so let's give you a hypothetical situation here that would show some aspects of self-control. So let's say that somebody comes up to you, just walks up to you and says that as a student of IUSB, you were randomly entered into a contest. So just by virtue of being a registered student here at IUSB, you were randomly entered into a contest and you are the big winner. And let's say that it's legit and you completely believe it. This is on the up and up. So you are the winner and your prize is either $10,000 right now. So they are literally carrying the briefcase filled with $10,000 cash, and it could be yours right now if you decide, or you can wait until you graduate and you will be given $100,000. So you have a choice between 2 options, either $10,000 today, or you can decide to wait, and once you graduate from IUSB, $100,000 will be put into your bank account. So the decision then is, what do you do in this particular situation? What's the best reward in this particular situation? And as we're going to see, it depends upon the characteristics of the individual. So let's say, for example, that you are, you know ahead of time that you have student loans, you have financial aid that you will need to pay back, and many people are in this particular situation, and you know that you are going to have crushing student debt as soon as you graduate. In this situation, the $10,000 might look very tempting today, but you would make the decision and say, you know what, I could use $10,000 right now, but it would be wonderful to get that $100,000 to be able to either wipe out or make a significant dent in my student debt when I graduate. So for this particular student, they would say, you know what, I'm going to pass on the $10,000. I choose the $100,000 later on. However, another student might make a completely different decision. And for that student, let's say that their situation was that they had a loved one that required life-saving surgery. And that life-saving surgery needed to be done within the next couple of weeks. And it has the conveniently plot-driven price of $10,000, right? So in that case, the person might say to themselves, you know, $100,000, 2-3 years down the road, that would be great, but $10,000 right now to save my loved one, to give them this life-saving surgery, that is worth an enormous value to me. Definitely choose the $10,000 right now. So we're going to see how psychology explains the differences between those two choices. And then we're also going to take a look at how the Ainsley-Raylan model of self-control helps us explain some rather bizarre behavior. So for example, psychopaths, people that have no empathy, they do not care about anyone, they use their friends, they have no qualms about, no loyalty or anything like that. Why is it that they have these particular characteristics? We're going to see that today. Why is it that children are very impulsive, very living in the moment? However, when you grow up, that tends to fade away. So what is it about a child's mind that's different from an adult's mind that leads to this impulsivity? And then finally, if you want to change your behavior, if you have a bad habit, for example, if you have an instance where you lose self-control, we're going to see a technique that comes from this Ainsley-Raylan model of self-control that can be very effective in helping you exert self-control over a situation where currently you may lack the ability to exert self-control. But we're going to start with a very nice, very dramatic description of some of the concepts we're going to be talking about. This comes from the movie Jaws. And if you've never seen it and you don't mind not going to the ocean for about 5 to 10 years when the effects wore off, I highly recommend checking it out. But we're going to take a look at a scene where they describe what we're going to see in just a moment, which is the varying reward function. And in this scene, just to give you a little bit of context, Jaws has already, the shark has already killed a few tourists. So the sheriff, a marine biologist, and a shark hunter have been dispatched to basically capture the shark. And what they've done is, this is their first night, I believe, out on the ocean. They've all gotten drunk. They've all bonded. And they start comparing battle wounds. They start comparing scars that they got from various sharks and from various, marine life. And they finally ask the shark hunter about a particular scar that he has. And it turns out it was an old tattoo. And he was on he served in the Navy, and he was on the Annapolis. And that was the ship that delivered the nuclear bomb used on Hiroshima. And that ship was actually sunk. And he had this, as you're going to see, death-defying experience with when he was in the water.
Japanese submarine slammed 2 torpedoes into our side, Chief. It was coming back from the island of Tinian to Lady, just delivered the bomb, the Hiroshima bomb. 1,100 men went into the water. Vessel went down in 12 minutes. Didn't see the first shot for about half an hour. Tiger, 13-footer, you know that when you're in the water, Chief? You tell by looking from the dorsal to the tail. What we didn't know was our bomb mission had been so secret. No distress signal had been sent. They didn't even list us overdue for the lead. Very first light, Chief. Sharks come cruising. So we formed ourselves into tight groups. You know, it's kind of like old squares in the battle, like you see in a calendar, like the Battle of Waterloo. And the idea was, shark comes the nearest man, and then he starts pounding and hollering and screaming. Sometimes the shark would go away. Sometimes he wouldn't go away. Sometimes that shark, he looks right into you, right into your eyes. You know the thing about a shark, he's got life in his eyes. Black eye, like a doll's eye. When he comes at you, he doesn't seem to be living until he bites you. And those black eyes roll over white, and then you hear that terrible high-pitched screaming. The ocean turns red, and despite all the pounding and the hollering, they all come in, they rip you to pieces. Nobody in that first storm lost 100 men. I don't know how many sharks, maybe 1,000. I don't know how many men, we averaged 6 an hour. On Thursday morning, Chief, I bumped into a friend of mine, Herbie Robinson, Cleveland. Baseball player, bosun's mate. I thought he was asleep. Reached over to wake him up. Bobbed up and down in the water. It was like a kind of top. Upended. Well, he'd been bitten in half below the waist. Noon the 5th day, Mr. Hooper, lucky he'd been toured. So he swung in low and he saw us to the young pilot, a lot younger than Mr. Hooper anyway. He saw us and he come in low, and 3 hours later a big fat PBY comes down and started to pick us up. You know, that was the time I was most frightened, waiting for my turn. I'll never put on a life jacket again. So 1,100 men went in the water. 360 men come out. The sharks took the rest. June the 29th, 1945. Anyway, we delivered the bomb.
All right. So he mentions that him and his crew, they were in the water for days, right? So they were in the water for days. They were getting attacked by sharks for days. And then another, in the Air Force, a pilot comes by and spots them. And then they send over the rescue boats to pick them up. And very interestingly, he mentions that that was when he was most afraid, when he was waiting for his turn. Now, logically, he should have been the most afraid when he knew that help was the furthest off, right? So once you fall into the water, that is the maximum amount of time before you're going to get rescued. That's the maximum amount of time before you're going to get help. That should be the time when you are the most scared, because that is when you have the highest chance of not surviving this particular ordeal. But he mentions that his scariest time was when he was waiting for his turn, when the rescue ship was there and they started hauling people out of the ocean, and he was maybe minutes, maybe seconds away from being saved, and that's when he was the most afraid. So that is illogical from a sense of when do you have the greatest chance of survival. But as we're going to see, that is one of the implications and basic ideas behind the Ainsley-Raylan model of self-control. So remember that example. We'll revisit it, and I'll also give you some other examples about when the value of something increases, the closer you get to actually receiving it. So self-control, psychologically, self-control, what we consider to be self-control is when we have choices for what we want to do, what we can do, and we choose the optimal pattern of behavior. And it just so happens that that optimal pattern of behavior is often a choice of taking a larger later reward over a smaller sooner reward. So you want to do the larger reward over the smaller reward, but the self-control comes in because it's a later reward. So it's a larger and later reward over a smaller and sooner reward. Or conversely, if you accept a smaller, sooner punishment over a larger, later punishment. So both of those are what we typically think of as self-control. So we're going to focus more on the larger, later reward over a smaller, sooner reward. So I'll give you an example that permeates our society, and that is the example of people who are trying to get fit, people who are trying to attain a certain physical and health standard. This is a larger, later reward. And oftentimes, this is one of the ideas that come up when we think about people who have self-control. So we got Thanksgiving coming up. And if somebody is trying to get into shape, somebody's trying to clean up their eating habits, and they go to Thanksgiving dinner, and you're like, oh, look at all these pies that we have here. You know, which one would you like? And they're like, no, thank you. You know, I'm watching what I eat this holiday season. You would look at them and say, wow, that person has self-control. If, on the other hand, they said, you know what, I'm really looking at what I'm eating this holiday season, but you know what, give me 2 slices of the apple, give me 1 slice of the peach, and cover it all with whipped cream. You wouldn't look at them and say, wow, I wish I had their self-control. Wow, look at that self-control. Because they've chosen a smaller, sooner reward over a larger, later reward. So when you are trying to get into shape, when you're trying to get healthy, when you're trying to clean up your eating, this is the larger, later reward. This, on the other hand, is the smaller, sooner reward. So self-control comes from choosing the larger, later reward over the smaller, sooner reward. And anybody who makes that New Year's resolution that this is the day that I'm going to get, you know, this is the year I'm getting into shape, this is the year I'm cleaning up my health. If on January 2nd they're stuffing their mouth with donuts, you don't look at them and say, wow, do they have self-control? You look at them and say, wow, they don't have self-control. So again, we're talking about larger, later, and smaller, sooner rewards. For health and wellness, that's the larger reward, and that's the smaller reward. And we know that this is the larger reward because if you could magically give one of these 2 things to somebody, if you met somebody on the street and you said, you know what, I have magical powers, and I can either give you the body that you want, all right? So whatever you value muscles, you got muscles. You value leanness, you got leanness. You value curves, you got curves. Whatever you want, snap my fingers, I'll give it to you. Or snap my fingers, I'll give you a donut. Which one do you want? Body you've always wanted, or do you want a donut? And everybody is going to choose that body that they've always wanted, that they've always worked for. That's the larger reward. It requires self-control, and it's an example of self-control because that is the larger, later reward. This takes years to accomplish. This is the smaller, sooner reward. This, depending upon where you live, compared to a donut store, you can have in about 5 minutes. So again, self-control comes when people, or is shown when people choose that larger, later reward over a smaller, sooner reward. So to kind of explain how this works and why people often fail at self-control. So it's difficult to do this, and people oftentimes will give in and have the donuts or pizza or whatever else does not fit their macros. They'll give in and choose that and sabotage their long-term goals. So how does this occur? Well, Ainsley and Raylan came up with a model of self-control. And this model focuses on the fact that there is a preference between the smaller, sooner reward and the larger, later rewards. But these preferences, they shift over time. So these preferences change over time. And the shift, this change occurs because the reward value, the value of a reward, it changes as a function of its delay. That is, it changes as a function of how close it is to being delivered. All right, so that's the delay. How long before this reward is delivered? Your own personal value for that reward changes the sooner it gets to being delivered. So before we go on, we have to clarify that idea of reward value. And reward value is your own personal value for whatever the reward is. Okay, so it's not an objective amount. It's how you personally feel, how much you personally value any particular reward. And money is a great example. So for most people, $1,000 has high personal reward. All right, so it's $1,000. It's got really high personal reward. You take a look at some of the richest people in the world, like Bezos, the owner of Amazon. And for him, $1,000 might have very low reward. All right, if you are worth billions upon billions of billions, you might not even, lean over to pick up $1,000 bill if you find it on the sidewalk, because the value of $1,000 is so low for that individual. But the value of $1,000 is high for most of us. If you're a homeless individual, the value of $1,000 is through the roof because it gets you off the street, for the time being. It can help you get back to regular life. So that $1,000, which is an objective amount of money, has different reward values depending upon who's valuing that $1,000. And that reward value changes the closer and closer that $1,000 gets to being delivered. So once again, we're taking a look at that situation where you have a very close reward. Again, you win that lottery. You can either have $10,000 right now, briefcase in hand. The person has it, will hand it over to you, no questions asked, as your prize. Or you can have $100,000 later. And as we mentioned before, somebody who knows they're going to have a lot of student debt when they graduate will choose the $100,000. However, somebody who has a loved one that needs life-saving surgery, they will choose the immediate $10,000. And we're going to see that both of those choices can be explained by understanding the reward value of that money and how it changes as the time that or as the delay to its delivery changes as well. So before we tackle those other examples, the student loan and the life-saving surgery, let's go back to JAWS. So once again, we have that description of the amount of fear that this individual had while he was waiting for his turn to be saved. And when he initially fell into the water, yes, he was scared, but he was most scared when he was waiting for his turn to be saved. When he actually saw the boat and being saved was very, very close, that reward was being very, very close to being delivered, that's when he felt the most scared. So this ties in directly to the Ainsley-Raylan model of self-control. So their model of self-control is built on the idea that any reward has a personal internal reward value. Okay, so this reward value is tied to the actual objective reward, but importantly, it changes across time, it changes across individuals, right? So for some people, again, $1,000 is a huge reward. For other people, $1,000 is, I don't really care. So again, reward value is your own personal valuation of a particular reward. Here we got time on the x-axis. And then here we have when the reward is delivered. So this is when you actually get the reward. So back here, you know that you can have the reward, but this is when you actually get the reward. And as you can see, when that reward is delivered, as you get closer and closer and closer to that reward, your reward value goes up and up and up and up. So one of the examples of this that everybody has gone through, and hopefully you can remember this far back, when you were a child at Christmas time, that month leading up to December 25th, that month leading up to the time when you finally got to open your presents, when you finally got your reward delivered, your anticipation of your present changed, right? So at the beginning of December, you see that present under the tree, and you're like, ooh, I'm excited. I want my present. As it gets closer, you're like, ooh, I can't wait until that day. Oh my gosh, here it comes, here it comes. A week before, you're like, oh my gosh, can I open my present now? Can I take a peek? And your mom's like, no, can't do it. The night before, you can barely go to sleep, right? You can barely stand it. 2 o'clock in the morning, you try to convince your parents that it is Christmas Day. Like, it would be fine to open the presents right now because the reward value of that present has increased. And then that moment when it's placed into your hands and you are mere seconds away from tearing off the wrapping paper, that's when the reward value of that present is the highest. And you can just barely wait to tear that open. So we've all gone through this where we have that increasing reward value. Again, the present hasn't changed. The present that you received was the same value the whole way through, but your feeling, your experience of the value increased the closer it got to delivery. So what happened to our shark hunter? What happened when he fell into the water initially? Well, we're going to switch this reward value, just so we can use the same graph, with fear of losing the reward. All right, so the reward value for him was being saved, right? That was the reward that he was looking forward to. That was the reward that he was anticipating. They were going to list them as overdue. They were going to send out airplanes to find him. He was expecting a reward at a future date. When he initially fell into the water, he was over here. And the reward value of being saved had this much internal psychological reward to him. Right? So his life being saved was worth that much to him. But as the time progressed, and especially when he saw that survey plane, when the plane passed overhead and he knew that they'd been spotted, and now it's time for the ships to come. And when the ship finally comes and people started getting hauled out, the value of him being saved increased. So the fear of losing that increased. Right? So the point where it was his turn, and it was only like 5 people ahead of him, 4 people ahead of him, 2 people ahead of him. At that moment, the fear of losing that reward, the fear of being attacked by a shark at that moment was so incredibly high that he mentions that he'll never strap on a life jacket again because he's not going to go through that close delivery of the reward at another time. So logically makes no sense. Should have been the most afraid the first moment that he fell into the water. Should have been less afraid when he saw the airplane. Should have been even less afraid once the ships, came. But the reverse is psychologically true because as that reward came closer to being delivered, as him being saved came closer to being delivered, the fear of losing that reward because of the value of the reward increased until the point where he was going mad waiting for his turn. All right, so any questions on these shifting reward values? Make sense? All right, so let's take a look at how Ainsley and Raylan's model of self-control can begin to understand why certain people will make certain decisions. So we'll start off with the student who knows that they're going to have a ton of student debt when they graduate, and they are offered $10,000 right now. So that height of that line is how much $10,000 is worth to them at this moment. And then we also have $100,000. So this is what $10,000 would be worth upon delivery. That's what $100,000 would be worth upon delivery. All right, so we can definitely see that the $100,000 is the much bigger reward. It's a bigger reward for this individual. That is the reward curve, the reward function for the $10,000 reward. That is the reward function for the $100,000 reward. And one of the keys to the Ainsley-Raylan model of self-control is that you will always choose the reward that has a higher reward value to you. So in this case, this individual right here is where he meets the person who's going to give him the reward. Right here is where he finds out that it's $10,000 right now or $100,000 when you graduate. And he says, you know what, I'm going to choose the higher reward value and I'm going to go with the $100,000. And then this is where the individual goes, are you sure? I have it right here. right in your hands. And he's like, well, it's a little bit closer now, but yeah, still, I'm going to go with the higher reward. I'm going to go with the $100,000. And the guy literally, goes, well, it's right here. Briefcase is right there. Just reach out and take it. It's all yours. And he gets here, and he's like, you know what? This function is still below the $100,000 function, so I'm going to choose $100,000 instead. Past this point, smaller, sooner reward is no longer available. And then as he goes here and he finally graduates, he comes up there and he goes, you know what? That reward that I received was so much higher than this reward. I don't regret turning down the $10,000. I'm glad I got the $100,000. So he would choose the $100,000. But what about the student who has a loved one that needs life-saving surgery? In that case, the value of the $10,000, because it allows this life-saving surgery to occur, that's the reward value of that $10,000. So it includes the $10,000 plus being able to save your loved one. Compared to that, that's the value of the $100,000 later. So they still have reward curves. They still have these changing reward functions. But when this person is offered the $10,000 right now, they look at their reward functions and they say, I'm going to choose the one that's worth more to me. And right now it's the $10,000. And as the person puts that $10,000 into their hands, that value goes up, 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 until they grab the 10 grand and they're like, yes, I'm so glad I chose this 10 grand. It's the right decision. That's the value for the 100. That's the value for the $10,000. And then later on, once they cash in that $10,000 and they saved their loved one, later on that $100,000 reward function is still in play. You don't get the $100,000 anymore, but it's still in play. And at this point, when this person graduates, they might look at it and say, you know what? That $100,000 right now has that much value. But I don't regret my decision whatsoever, because saving my loved one with the 10 grand has still that much value to it. So you look back and you say, I still made the right choice. I still feel that, the $10,000 was worth it, because the reward function for the $100,000 never got above the reward function for the $10,000. All right, so in both those cases, the choice that was made initially stayed the choice near the end of the situation, right? So the initial student chose the $100,000, ended up with the $100,000. The other student chose the $10,000, ended up with the $10,000. But what about when you change your mind? That's where the failure of self-control comes in. And that occurs when your smaller, sooner reward function crosses above your larger, later reward function at some point. So it starts off lower. Your smaller, sooner reward starts off lower than your larger, later reward. But then as the smaller, sooner reward gets closer and closer and closer to delivery, the reward function for that reward goes above the reward function for the larger, later reward. And remember that you always choose the reward with the higher reward function at the time. So this is a situation where self-control fails, where you have that breakdown in self-control. So let's illustrate this with an example that'll be near and dear to many of your hearts, and that is the example of studying for an exam. So you will have, in the course of your university career, and you probably already have these choices, you will have the choice between the larger, later reward of studying for an exam so that you can do well in that course, so you can graduate, so you can get your degree, so you can get the career of your choice. That's a larger, later reward. The smaller, sooner reward is going out to party that weekend. So how is it, and again, this is an idea of self-control, right? If somebody says, oh, I have a huge exam on Monday, but I'm going to go party during the weekend, nobody ever looks at that person and says, wow, I wish I had their self-control, right? You always say, oh, I got this huge exam. Oh my gosh, my friends got concert tickets to like my favorite band this weekend, and they're all going to Chicago and they're going to make a weekend of it. I'm going to say no. That's an example of self-control. So how does a failure in self-control happen? How does a person who says they're going to study this weekend but ends up going to the concert, how does that occur? Well, let's start it off on the Friday. So let's say that you're going for the entire weekend. You're going to leave on the Friday, Saturday, Sunday. You're going to have an entire week, in Chicago. Monday is your exam. All right. So this is the larger later reward of doing well on your exam. This is the smaller sooner reward of going to the concert and having that fun weekend with your friends. So what happens initially? Let's say that this is Thursday night over here. Initially, let's label some of these. So that's going to the party. That later one is studying. And initially, your value for studying outweighs the value for going to the party. So on Thursday night, when your friends spring it on you and they say, hey, you know what? We got tickets, for this weekend. Sorry it's last minute, but we got an extra one you want to come with. We got hotels. It'll be fun. It'll be great. I know it's a band that you love. On to Thursday night, you're going to sit there and you're going to choose the function that is higher. And in this case, the function that is higher is studying. So you're going to tell them, you know what, sounds great, but I'm going to choose to stay home this weekend and study. Friday morning, they phone you up again. And they're like, offer's still open. We can still do this. You can still come. And again, you choose the function that is higher, that has the higher reward. And you tell your friends, nope, still going to stay and study. That Friday evening leaving, right? The Friday evening departure time is getting closer and closer. So Friday afternoon, they phone you up again and they say, are you sure? This is the concert you've always wanted to see. It's probably a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. And notice that the smaller sooner reward is creeping up in its value. But at this point, your larger later reward is still higher. So at this point, you will still say, no thank you. I want to choose to study. That is worth more to me right now. But as that departure time gets closer, there's going to be a crossing point. So maybe 2 hours before they're leaving, 2 hours before the carpool gets going, they're going to ask you, do you want to come? Right? This is getting down to the wire. And at this point, you're going to be on the fence. At this point, you're going to say to yourself, oh my gosh, I know I should study, but that sounds fun. Got to do well on my exam. Once in a lifetime concert opportunity. Should think of my career. Should think about spending time with my friends. That's the point where it crosses where you're going to be indecisive because neither reward function has higher value. And then finally, incidentally, your friends should have given up by now. But anyways, finally, when your friends show up to your door in the car, ready to go, and they knock on your door and you answer the door and they're like, look, this is it. We are leaving now, right? We are going right now. Are you in or are you out? At this point, because the delivery of that smaller sooner reward is right there, it's immediate, that's the highest it's going to be. And this is the time when it's actually above the reward value of your larger later reward. So at this point, you still do the same thing you've been doing this whole time. You still choose the larger reward. But this is the first time that the smaller sooner reward value has gone above the larger later reward. So you're still maximizing your reward value, but this is the point where you say, you know what? I'm going to go to the concert. I deserve it. It's worth, basically you're saying it's worth more to me right now to go to the concert. So again, you make that decision you've been making this whole time. You choose the higher reward value. So you go there on the Friday night. You cash in your smaller sooner reward. You wake up on Saturday morning and notice that your reward function for studying for the exam is still below your smaller sooner reward for going to the concert. So on that Saturday morning, you're thinking to yourself, I made the right decision. I did the right thing. Right around Saturday afternoon, you start to get indecisive again. You start thinking to yourself, well, I don't know if this was such a good idea. Sunday morning, you're saying to yourself, I made a mistake. This is horrible, because now that the exam is getting close, the larger later reward function is higher. You've already cashed it in though. You can't do that larger later reward anymore. But now you feel that value of the larger later reward going up. And this is where you start to regret things. Sunday night, you're massively regretting things. And this is where you're driving home and you're telling yourself, never again. I'm never doing this again. I'm not talking to my friends ever again. I massively regret what I've done. And then when you sit down to that exam on Monday morning, that is when you're going to feel the absolute worst, because that's when the reward would have been delivered. That's when the larger later reward is at its maximum. So this crossing over of the smaller sooner reward, that is when self-control breaks down, right? This is, if you are cleaning up your eating, if you're trying to get healthy, right here is where you say, eating healthy and having a healthy body is worth more to me than donuts are, because there's no donuts in your vicinity. Right here is where you're staring at a donut, you're staring it down. It is literally right in front of you. It is 10 seconds from your mouth. That donut is going to be worth a lot more than eating healthy, because it's right in front of you. So this crossing over is where self-control fails. And incidentally, this is why, if you ever do try to clean up your eating and you try to eat healthy, one of the major tips for doing that is to get rid of all the bad food in your house. So wherever you live, clean out your pantry, clean out your cupboards, clean out your refrigerator, and get rid of everything. Because by getting rid of everything, you push the delay on that smaller sooner reward further. So if you got donuts in your fridge, you are only ever 2 minutes away from having donuts. You're living right there. But if you get rid of everything, then you're like a 10-minute drive, and getting up and getting dressed and going out, you're about like 15 minutes from getting donuts. That puts you here. So again, it's all the idea of make the crossover where the smaller sooner reward crosses over to a higher reward value. That's when self-control breaks down. All right, any questions on the basic idea of the Ainsley-Raylan model of self-control? All right. So now let's talk about some applications of it. So we're first going to take a look at how this explains psychopathic, basically empathy-free behavior. So one thing about psychopaths is they're very in the moment. They'll take advantage of any situation, and they will not think twice about betraying their friends if it serves their own purposes. So one classic example from movies comes from Clockwork Orange. So this is Alex here, and he's the leader of a gang called the Droogies, and he is their leader, but they're his friends. They're his gang. He spends a lot of time with them. He considers them his friends. However, we're going to see that he doesn't treat them in the normal manner that that you would treat friends, and that's because of his reward function. So he's one of the classic psychopaths, no empathy, no loyalty, and we'll take a look at an example. Incidentally, this is another great movie to check out for a lot of psychology phenomenon being illustrated, including classical conditioning. All right, so once again, these are his best friends in the world. So remember that when you take a look at what happens when you're best friends with a psychopath.
I taught you much, my little Droogies. Now tell me what you had in mind, Georgie boy.
Oh, the old Malocca Plus first, what do you not say? He's taking the shoulders up.
Showing him a lot of Plus.
But you especially wear the stone.
Because we got start on you. Yeah, a lot of Plus, eh? Yeah.
All right, so they were talking mostly English. They got their own slang, just in case you couldn't decode it. The other members of his gang thought that maybe, perhaps they could be in charge for a little bit. You know, maybe they could do things that they wanted to do. Maybe Alex didn't need to have all the power in that gang. Most people, if their friends say something like that, would say, all right, you know, let's try it out. Let's discuss it. I value you as a friend. Let's see what we can do about this situation. But not a psychopath. This is what a psychopath will do.
As we walked along the flat block arena, I was calm on the outside, but thinking all the time. So now it was to be Georgie the General, saying what we should do and what not to do, and Dim as his mindless, grinning bulldog. But suddenly I viddied that thinking was for the gloopy ones, and that the only ones used like inspiration and what Bog sense. For now it was lovely music that came to my aid. There was a window open with a stereo on, and I viddied right at once what to do.
All right, so his best friends in the world, all right, just tried to decimate them, just tried to take them out, cashed in his friends, all right? So in this case, he chose the reward of staying in command. He chose the reward of getting revenge over the reward of his friends. And what is the reward of having friends? Well, when things are going great, oftentimes, you know, it's just companionship, it's just, you know, hanging out with them, it's just, you know, continuing to have good times. But the large value of friends comes when things are going badly, right? So, you know, when you need help, when you need assistance. And Alex finds this out in the movie because he gets arrested by the police and he gets put through a psychological training procedure, classical conditioning procedure, where the very thought of violence makes him nauseous. So they train him to the point where if somebody insults him and he's like, oh, I'm going to punch you, he'll be like he can't do it anymore. And then they send him back out into society and he is helpless. He just cannot defend himself anymore. He's literally like the easiest pushover in the world. And at this point is when he would really need a friend. This is when it would be great to go back to his droogies and say, oh my gosh, I just got out. I don't know what they did to me. I don't know what happened to me, but I cannot defend myself. Can I stay with you guys? Can you protect me for a little bit? And his friends would be typical of what friends would do. They would say, yeah, sure, we'll help you out. We'll give you a hand. We got a couch for you to sleep on. We'll accompany you when you go out. We'll help you through this, right? We know that you need, help right now. And here we are as friends with our large reward. And here you go. You can have this large reward. He, however, did not go for the large reward. He went for the smaller, sooner reward. And because of that, this is what happened to him when he got released and he runs into his friends.
Oh no! Well.
All right, so in the meantime, when he was in jail and he was getting retrained, his friends actually got recruited into the police force, and now they are in a position of authority.
Well. It's your real Alex. Long time no meet, Drew. How goes? It's impossible. I don't believe it.
Evidence of the old Jesse. Nothing up our sleeve. No magic, little Alice. A job for two who are now at job age. The police.
All right, so as you can imagine, we won't watch the whole clip here. But as you can imagine, they don't help him. They drag him to a rather deserted area, and then they have their revenge. They torture him for a while. So why is it that Alex behaved the way that he did? Why is it that psychopaths who don't have empathy will trade in their friends at the least drop of a hat, whereas most of us would not? Most of us, if our friends offended us, would say, you know what? I really want to punch my friend in the face right now, or I really want to take some revenge, but I value them as a friend, so let's work it out. Let's not do, that particular reward, even though it would feel good at the moment. Let's not do that because I value our friendship. What's the difference between a normally operating individual and a psychopath? Well, according to the Ainsley-Raylan model of self-control, it has to do with the shape of the delay function for the larger later reward. So that shape of that larger later reward delay function, it has a lot of differences in different situations across different individuals. And one of the principles of it is that the more deeply scalloped it is, the more curved it is, the less flat that it is, the more impulsivity you'll see in a particular individual. So a very controlled individual who doesn't have a lot of impulsive behavior will have a very flat, larger later reward curve. Somebody who is very impulsive, like a psychopath, will have a very deep or scalloped or scooped out larger later reward curve. So let's take a look at why that would be the case. So this would be a highly scalloped, curved, larger later reward. This is a flatter, larger later reward. This is what most people have in terms of the reward functions when it comes time to deal with their friends. This is what Alex has in terms of the reward functions when he deals with his friends. So let's take a look at the typical individual first. So let's say that right here, your friend does something that hurts you. Your friend does something that you disagree with or you don't like, right? Let's say that they, you're in charge of a particular project, right? So you and your friends are working on a particular project, and this is your project. You're the leader. You're in charge, and your friend says, you know what? Why don't we try me in charge instead? Why don't we do that? And you have hurt feelings, and you feel that they're trying to take away your authority. Your friend does something that you don't like. As soon as they do it, this is your reward function. So you cannot take revenge right at that moment, right? You can't take revenge when you're in there with the other group. You need to bide your time. And maybe you think to yourself, you know what? I know my friend pretty well. I know that, in about 30 minutes, they're going to go to the vending machine. And when they do, I'm going to follow them and I'm going to punch them in the face. Like, man, that would just feel so good. They think they're going to take my project away from me. They think that they're going to be in charge. Just wait until they get to that vending machine. I'm going to punch you in the face. You might have that thought, right? That thought is worth that much when they first insult you. This is the value of a friendship. And you're going to say to yourself, you know what? I would love to do that. But this person's been my friend for a while. I value our friendship. I really want that larger later reward. If I ever have to move and I need some help, if I ever need a couch to sleep on. So I'm going to stick with that larger later reward, and I'm going to choose not to punch them in the face. 10 minutes goes by, and they're 20 minutes away from going to the vending machine. And at that point, you say, I'm not going to punch them in the face. 20 minutes goes by, only 10 minutes to the vending machine. And at that point, again, the value of the friendship is higher because of that very shallow, larger later reward curve. So again, you're going to say, not going to punch them in the face. Your friend stands up and says, I'm going to go to the vending machine. Even when it's right there, even if you follow them out to the vending machine and have your fist cocked and you're just waiting for them to turn around, even at that moment, you would say to yourself, you know what, the reward is still lower than maintaining the friendship. So the fist goes away, and you're like, you know what, I'm not going to cash it in. And then years later, when you graduate and you're moving, and you call up your friend and you say, I got to move. Can you help me load the truck? And they're like, yes, I can. You're like, man, I'm glad I didn't punch you in the face way back when. That's a typical individual. That's why we typically can maintain our friendships. For somebody who's a psychopath, that's their reward function. So much like everybody else, when they get slighted, you know, when Georgie boy said maybe he should be the general, Alex right there said, you know what? I'm going to throw them in the river and I'm going to stab them with my knife. But he didn't have the opportunity at that point, and that reward of doing it was still lower. That's why he didn't immediately, as soon as they started talking, was like, oh, stab, stab, stab. So he wouldn't do that. But as his opportunity got closer, the reward of taking revenge for him became higher than the reward of maintaining the friendship, because he has this extremely deep larger later reward function. So when that time occurred, when he realized, you know what, this is my chance, he decided, yes, I'm going to attack them. Yes, I'm going to take my revenge. I'm going to cash in my smaller sooner reward, and I'm going to forfeit my larger later reward. He wasn't delusional. He knew that they weren't going to be friends with him anymore. But he said, I'm going to cash in my smaller sooner reward because its reward function is higher right now. And that's why later on, when he needed their help, and they were like, well, look who's here. Well, time for revenge. He wasn't sitting there going, well, you know, I had my fun. It was worth it. Come on, give me your revenge. He was sitting there going, oh, no, it can't be. It can't be, because he realized that he cashed in his larger later reward. And at that moment, when he needed their help, it was worth so much more to him than his smaller sooner reward of gathering revenge. But at the time, because of this deeply curved function, getting revenge on his friends was worth more to him. And much like the rest of us, he made the choice to maximize his reward function, and he lost his self-control, and he went after his friends. All right, 2 more examples. Children, why are they impulsive? So if this child was promised that they would go out for ice cream, if they did not make a mess when they were painting, when they were doing their activity of painting, if you tell them, look, you got half an hour to paint. When I come back, if it's all nice and clean, we're going to go out for ice cream. You come back half hour later, this is what you see. Why is it that children oftentimes have difficulty with impulsivity, difficulty with delaying gratification, whereas later on, we don't have as much difficulty. Later on, we will not circumvent our larger later rewards. And again, it has to do with the shape of that larger later reward. And what research has shown is that as we age, one of the developmental changes that occurs is that you become less impulsive as you grow older. And what that means is that you do not have as deeply scalloped a delay function. So children have a very deep larger later reward delay function, one that adults have basically through development flattened out. So this is the child's larger later reward function. This is the smaller sooner reward of making a mess with the paints, because it is fun, it is a good time. That's the smaller sooner reward. This is the larger later reward of going out for ice cream. So again, it's a larger later reward. If you asked a child right then, hey, do you want to make a mess with paints right now? Or would you like this ice cream sundae that I have in my hand right now? The child would go, ice cream sundae for sure. That's a larger later reward. But when they're put into that situation, and as the time when you are leaving the room, leaving the door, and their opportunity to have fun with the paint, to go crazy with the paint, comes closer and closer and closer, that smaller sooner reward goes above the larger later reward, so they make that choice. So when you're looking at them and you say, are you going to make a mess? They're sitting over here and they're like, no, I'm not going to make a mess. I'm going to choose the ice cream because the ice cream right now is better. And when you're about to leave the door and you're like, you're about to leave the room and you're like, are you going to make a mess? And they're like, no, I'm not going to make a mess because the ice cream is still valued at a higher amount. Once you close that door and that delivery can be done of the smaller sooner reward, then all of a sudden, because of their reward functions, they're like, you know what? Making a mess is awesome. I would rather have that than ice cream right now. And then when the parents come back and they say, you know what, we were going to go from ice cream. Oh my gosh, what have you done? No ice cream for you. That's when they feel regret, because that's when they could have cashed in the larger later reward if they didn't already circumvent it. That impulsive, deeply scalloped function goes away as you age, and that's just a natural developmental tendency. All right, one last example, and this is basically a nice little take-home strategy that you can use to increase your own self-control. So we all have instances where we fail in self-control. Bad habits are typically an example of that. So they're called bad habits because people know that they should not be doing them. They're called habits because they do them, and it's a breakdown in self-control. So how can you change the function or increase your self-control? One way to do it is to change the function for the smaller, sooner reward. And one way to do that is a commitment response. So a commitment response reduces the value of a smaller, sooner reward. So let's go back to the example of the person who hears about the concert on the Friday and their friends are going, but knows that they need to stay home and they need to study. What can they do? Especially if they feel that that smaller, sooner reward is just going to get too tempting Friday night, they're going to cave in. What can they do to increase their self-control? Well, what they can do is they can reduce the value of the smaller, sooner reward by a commitment response. So they can go to the bank and they can take $500 out of the bank and they can put it into a jar and they can go to their roommate and they can say, if I go to the concert on Friday, that $500 is yours. You get the $500. If I don't go to the concert, I keep the $500, right? That is the agreement I'm making with you. That is going to increase their self-control because it reduces the value of the smaller, sooner reward. So prior to that commitment response, prior to committing that $500, this is the value of going to the concert. And it is higher than the value of staying home and studying on that Friday night. However, if you make that commitment response, if you commit the $500 and $500 is worth enough to you, then going to the concert is worth the reward of going minus the reward of the $500. And if that pushes you below the larger later reward, then on that Friday night, when your friends are knocking at your door and they're like, hey, you want to go? You will say, you know what? I really do, but I can't lose that $500. And right now, that reward combination, going to the concert but losing $500, is below the reward of staying home and studying. So I got to pass. I'm going to stay home and study. All right, so that is it. So any final questions about anything we did? We're good? All right. So thanks for sticking it to the end. Next time we're doing our exam. So if you haven't already, check out the special online class in the YouTube playlist. And next class we'll do the exam. And thanks for coming by.